episode 3 of The Model Philosopher. In this episode I'll be talking to John Rosengrant about his work, his passions in modelling and how important character is in a good model. Before I get on to that, I'd like to give you a message from our sponsor. The Model Philosopher is very proud to be sponsored by Scale Model Challenge, the fastest growing and most exciting model show in the calendar. Scale Model Challenge celebrates its 15th anniversary this year, and as always it's going to bring us a mix of the very best in figure art and scale modelling in all genres, with its hands-on workshops from the best creators in the hobby, a world-leading contest, model clubs and display, over 150 vendors with unique and must-have products, entertainments and much more. And all under one roof in a fantastic conference venue and hotel with restaurants and cafes, a great bar and plenty of parking and rooms. Scale Model Challenge is where people from around the world meet to share and enjoy each other's work, to meet new friends making beautiful things, and to be part of a hugely vibrant and positive community of creative and enthusiastic modellers. Scale Model Challenge is a truly international show that brings the best to one place for 2.5 days of community and pure inspiration. To find out more about this unmissable modelling experience, head to scalemodelchallenge.com or check out the Facebook page Scale Model Challenge. You can also follow scale_model_challenge on Instagram. I never miss this show, and neither should you. I really do look forward to seeing you there. On to this episode's interview with John Rosengrant. Like many of us, John started modelling as a young child, in his case historical and classic monster models. After studying at art college, he moved to Los Angeles to break into the movie business, and after a period of hard work and hustle, he managed to get into the famous Stan Winston Studios, where he learnt his trade in character design and effects, working on movies like the Terminator series, Aliens, Predator, the Jurassic Park series, Iron Man, and Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. He went on to co-found his own effects studio, Legacy Effects, where he continued to work on some of the most famous movies of the late 20th and early 21st century, including Guardians of the Galaxy, The Hunger Games, Avengers movies, more of the Iron Man series, Pacific Rim, and a personal favourite of my own, Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water. Lately he created and operated the Muppet of Grogu in The Mandalorian, a character that was intended to be CGI until he convinced Jon Favreau to try a puppet, and it became the character we know and love today. Throughout his film career, you could say what John has always delivered is characters. Creatures and characters that have suspended disbelief to connect with viewers on an emotional and visceral level to serve the story of the films he worked on. Alongside 40 years of work in the film industry, John has always continued to work on scale modelling as a personal pursuit and for companies like S&T Products and Warriors Scale Models with Chris Morosco. As with his film work, John has always imbued his modelling with character and pathos. His superb grasp of anatomy, pose and expression has allowed him to produce some truly memorable and iconic pieces like Leave No Man Behind, The True Face of War, Valley Forge and his tired and shell-shocked Pacific Marine. In all his work there is a story, a point communicated from author to reader, and I was very happy indeed when he agreed to do this interview. Let's hear from John now. Thank you, John Rosengrant, for joining me on The Model Philosopher.
It's my pleasure, honestly.
Can you tell me how you got into making models? What it was about making them that first appealed to you?
Probably started when I was 5 years old, and my model making journey probably ran in tandem with my sci-fi special effects makeup and animatronics. I was all interested in all those things at once. But the first model kit, my dad, I'm sure he stayed up all night long building this thing. He hated things like models and art and all that. But he did a King Kong, the old Aurora kit for me because I really wanted that. And, you know, the first thing I noticed, it's missing some of the palm trees and some of the, and, he's like looking at me. Now in hindsight, I can look back and go, oh, Santa Claus wasn't happy doing this. So anyway, that was my first real interest in models. But then I really got into them 7, 8 years old when I think my dad did a few with me. But then I could just tell he didn't have the patience or didn't want to do them. So I started building them, and I did a lot of airplanes. I did ships, did a B-17, P-51, all the typical stuff. But then a little later, I got real serious with it. When I was probably 12, 13 years old, I started getting into reading about history, and I got into 1/72nd scale aircraft from World War One. And I read this book called The Canvas Falcons, and I was just fascinated with World War One aircraft. So I was always going to the hobby shop. And then I think this was around 1973, I saw the Tamiya kit of the Panzer II F with the Africa Corps guys, running alongside.
I can picture the box art now.
Yeah, great box art. And at that time, the figures seemed fantastic to me, but you look back on them now, they're little blobs. But at the time, I think, you're young and you have this imagination, and you start projecting some of that upon them, and they were more miraculous than they actually were. And then not too long after that, I discovered Schaef, and I realized that he was sculpting and converting figures, and I bought a magazine that had the two Hanemogs in there, the 251s, and I couldn't get enough of that. That was just incredible to me. And I ended up buying the diorama. I own that diorama. I have that Schaef, that inspiration piece. But and then I started I bought all those monogram kits just to get his tip sheets out of them. They're terrible kits, and the scale felt wrong to me because I was so entrenched by that point into me a 135th. It's like 132nd, but I didn't care. I wanted the tip sheet in each and every one of them. And I just couldn't get enough of what he was doing. And I was just really fascinated with being able to create my own figures. And, I was self-taught, and there's a lot of trial and error and green stuff putty and, stuff that didn't really work that well. But that's how you learn.
Well, that's the only way to learn, isn't it?
It is to dive in, make mistakes, and just know the next one will be better, and you realize, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And then you'll read in a magazine, or somebody will have a little blurb of, I used an epoxy putty, and it's like, oh, epoxy putty, so then you start going down that path, and you start figuring out, I bought some Milliput silver or yellow, or it's just fucking, how does anyone work with this? But
I still
Roger
feel that way about
Saunders
Milliput.
sure found a way to do it, but
yeah, right.
It's just what you get used to. I use mostly all Magic Sculpt now. I do some things in clay, and I'll mold them, but mostly I even find myself doing more and more just in Magic Sculpt, because I've learned you have to go back and carve and tune it up. But I'm getting sidetracked here, getting into technique. But Schaef, big influence on me.
What is it you enjoy about sculpting?
I think it's creating characters. And now that I'm doing it more and more, since I've been retired, I feel like, I'm not saying this from a braggadocious standpoint, but I feel like I'm getting better at it, because the more that you can do it, it's becoming more fun. Even I've always had fun with it, but it's even more fun now. And I think now I don't have to worry about a job or deadlines and all these other things. So now I can just take this stuff on and do it. But I enjoy creating characters. And for me, I still like building vehicles and whatnot, but I like populating them with soldiers and people. And I think that's what tells the story, not just some big hunk of steel, but it's people that had to endure these things. So I don't know. I like telling a story with them.
There is a lot of emotion in your sculpted work. I'm thinking particularly of the soldier with the mask.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Is that something you try to put through, more sort of character and emotion
Absolutely. I really look at photos and I study them, and I try to, because I wasn't there, I didn't do it, but I try to think about what that would be like. You're 19, 20 years old, and you've been whisked off with all these patriotic ideas, and then you get in the middle of it all and you find out it's really horrible. So I did a portrait for a collector of his dad who was in the Hertigon forest, and he sent me a bunch of pictures. And what I noticed was, a bright-eyed young man before he went, or when he was in the army initially, and then looking at photos of him after he had come back from the war. He had aged 10 years. It was like, wow, okay. So for me, when I was capturing his portrait, I used, because I had a lot of pictures of him as a young man, but I also used some of the things after the war, because I think it takes a toll. It takes a toll on you.
I imagine that the family member as well would know the man after the war better than the man before the war as well.
True. Yeah, because he's looked so young beforehand, and when he came out, it's probably all of 22, maybe 23 at the most. But he looked 35, and there's something about those young men of long ago. I think they were a more serious generation, and they all looked older to me, and they still do when I look at them in photos. They don't seem like they're 19.
Mm.
But there was a friend of my dad who was at Omaha Beach at the 29th, and talking to him about it, it's just like, I don't know why I lived. I don't know why. I didn't do anything any different. And I think a lot of them kind of had that feeling of when they came back. It's just like, well, why me? I'm grateful, but at the same time, they probably lost so many friends and people you were close to. So anyway, I try to incorporate that into the figures, all of the thought process that might be going on.
Of course, when you mention work, creating characters and what have you has been your trade for 40 years.
It has, yeah. I had the fortune of working with teams of great artists, great people, and we had the opportunity to create some really iconic characters for film. So I think that must be ingrained in me. But also when I was a young man in high school, I was really fascinated with Howard Pyle and N.C. Wyeth and those American illustrators, because they were being asked to tell a story. They were being asked to illustrate a book. And so with a painted image, they sometimes they outdid the book with their artwork, and became much more intriguing to look at their artwork than when you read the book that they were illustrating. It's like, oh wow, that's how they saw it. And the film business is a lot like that. You're creating a story, but you're also projecting an image, and you're creating it.
There's an extra layer added, I guess, with the interpretation of what you're given to do. The way you sort of translate what the director or the writer says they
It,
want.
it is, and there's a bit of performer in all of us, and then of course, once we made and created and built this stuff, we took it to set and performed it as puppeteers. But you do put yourself into the character, and I do the same thing with the miniatures. It's important to sort of project into the character and to think of it not as single dimension, but a little deeper than that, because I think there is some emotion that does come through when you in a performance, or when you think about how more than it's just outside appearance and rendering what's going on inside. It really doesn't think it's a villain.
Yeah.
I'm sure Hitler didn't think he was a villain.
Well, everyone's the hero of their own story.
I think they are. They probably are. But that's ego talking.
Yeah. It's somewhat solipsistic, yeah. But I think, if anything, that's something that's possibly missing a bit in models, that people focus so much on the technology and the machine that sort of depth of emotion, which, I mean, even if you don't make something which is very emotional in appearance, or very sort of full of character, if you're thinking about the character and you're, like you said, creating that character as you do it, it's going to come through in pose or in face or in something.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that's something we could do with more of in people's work?
Well, I think that helps it transcend from just a model into some form of art. I mean, art is something that's really not necessary. We do it because, I don't know, we're trying to tell a story, or you want it to be beautiful, or not really in the case for what we do, but you're trying to create interest and some reason to really look at it and think about it. I think the best compliment I got was a couple of times when I had a Vietnam veteran and a World War II veteran who saw my work at a show come up to me, wanted to find me and say that I really captured the look of what they had gone through. And to me, that was the ultimate compliment, because that's what I'm trying to do. So just to hear that back from them. And, it says to bring back smells and things I haven't thought of in decades. It's like, okay, well, then I'm trying to connect on some other level.
Well, that's what art does, doesn't it? It connects the artist and the viewer. And if there's not enough
It
there,
does.
then they can't
It
connect.
does. Yeah, if that's missing, if you don't take that double take and go back and look at it, it's because it didn't move you in any way.
I've heard you say that you put as much effort into an equal level of effort and commitment into every film you worked on, every project you worked on.
It is true.
How do you find a way in when maybe the script or the project isn't as engaging or as much meat on it as you might hope?
I guess that's the fanciful, young, boyish idea. You fall in love with it, and you think somehow this is going to rise above what I've just read is not good. But at the end of the day, your work is being, or your team's work is being looked at as a whole, and nobody is looking at it and putting a caveat on it. Well, this movie stunk. They look at it and like, did they do a good job? And that's at the end of the day. That's all I could come up with, was that we need to make this great. And if everybody on the project comes in at that A level or A+ level, then maybe it'll rise the whole thing up. But I don't think I put that much thought into it. I think it was just like, no, we're gonna make this great. This is what they've hired us to do, is to bring this thing to life. And,
is it a work ethic thing then, that if you're going to do it, you're
probably
going to do it very well?
Yeah, it's a work ethic thing. Yeah, for sure. There's that, but it's also just the want to just do it well.
Mm. Is it the same with commissions? Because I mean, in that case, it's not so much the team, you have to support, but if you're going to spend your time doing something.
With my model commissions, whether they be for a collector or if it's for a manufacturer, I won't do anything unless I'm interested in it. And that started way back when I started doing this stuff as a second job for purely for fun. And it's like in the film business, it's collaborative, but at the same time, you're being art directed in some way by a director or producer. God knows, an accountant or a lawyer, and somebody's got an opinion and they thrust it upon you. So when I was doing my model work, like you say, commissions, first rule of thumb, if I'm not interested in a winged Polish hussar from 1918, whatever, I'm not going to do it. I don't have any interest. And I prefer it if they say I would like a Revolutionary War, American Revolutionary War figure, or I want a World War II British figure, and leave it up to me. Because, and I'm very upfront, I tell them that I'm not going to be micromanaged. You're not going to tell me, It happened once where the guy wanted a photograph, and I felt like the photograph, I don't know, the guy was firing or something, and you're not connected to the figure. And I said, I will do the time period and do something similar to that, but I feel like he's got to be engaged. You got to be engaged. You got to see him. And if he's covering his face up with a rifle, I'm not interested in that. And so we proceeded, and I'm always, if you don't want it at the end of the day, it's fine. Somebody else probably will, or I'll just keep it. I don't care. Mm. And it ended up, he didn't care for it because it wasn't that photo at the end. And then they ended up selling it to somebody else, and it became a successful figure. But it's just different philosophies, and that's why I don't want to get into that with somebody. If I'm doing this for fun, I just want to have fun and live or die by my own sword. If it's my, if I make a bad choice, that's on me. It's not somebody else. I did that for, years with the movie business. It's like, there'll be times where you kind of go, what are your art credentials? Because your ideas suck.
But that's a fully commercial transaction.
It is, and job, they don't call it show play or show art; they call it show business. So you better understand that too.
Yeah,
and I would have that issue with my artists that worked for me through the years. Well, they didn't pick mine and all this. It's like, who's better, Monet or Rembrandt? They're all different. And this producer's taste happened to lead him to this. And it doesn't mean you're not a good artist. Our artists seem to have very fragile egos and shouldn't have any ego, but, as humans we do. But there'd be times when you'd almost have to reassure them that this is not an attack on you personally as an artist. It's just they made another choice. And this is the direction, this is what appeals to them. They like apples, not oranges. So don't take it personally. I had to learn that lesson myself. That's why I can give that advice out, because I remember as a young man starting out in this, you pour your heart and soul into these concept drawings or whatever, and then the guy next to you, his would get picked and yours wouldn't. And you just had to, you come to grips with it. Doesn't necessarily mean you're not good. It's just, it's not what they wanted.
They might, they might be wrong, but it's their money. So.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I would hear that all the time. Well, this is a much better design. Yeah, I agree with you. It probably is. But guess what? They're paying for it. And this is what they want. And there's a whole host of reasons why they might have gone with that. It's not offensive. It's not this. It's not this. It's not blue enough. It's not green enough. Who knows? So sort of gave up worrying about that.
I suppose everyone that lasts in the industry gets used to that, like you did.
I think you sort of have to. You have to sort of realize that it is a business, and first come, first serve with the money, and give them what they want. And if you're lucky enough to, along the way, be able to be creative, which I have to say a lot of times we were, that's why they did come to us, was they wanted our creativity. And then, on the flip side, you work with a director like a James Cameron that has a lot of great ideas, that can do it all himself if he had to anyway. Then it becomes very collaborative, and it's enjoyable because you got someone that's challenging you in a great way. Each experience is totally different. I mean, I had a young director wondering what shots in Aliens were CG. And it's like, well, none. It was all old
You would have noticed.
Yeah.
Computers weren't great back then.
Thank you for the backhanded compliment. But no, none of them were. But it's just a generational thing too. Everyone, I'm going to be 66 in June. Been around a while, and working with people half your age, you realize they just haven't had the same experiences or project their own experiences on. Of course they have BCG. That's not.
The pendulum seems to have swung back the other way, and it's more practical effects again. Is that?
It's all. It does. I from my perspective, I think they're both really necessary, because there's things you simply can't do with practical effects. What you can achieve, and I think was pretty effective in The Mandalorian with the little character, Baby Yoda to the world, Grogu, but was by having it there and performing, you gave the other actor something to react to. And acting is nothing but reacting. You react to somebody's way they say something, or the way they look at you or don't look at you. So it gives you something to, as an actor, to play off of. So I think in a lot of ways, if you can get what you can in camera with something, great. And then you're going to embellish it with, I mean, The Mandalorian, Grogu, if it wasn't for ILM removing all the rods and cables and things, you see the game. But now that stuff has become so second nature that it actually makes the puppeteering a little easier to do than back in the day of, say, Aliens, where you had to hide everything because you're going to see it. Or if he's a clever filmmaker like James Cameron, he's lighting it and smokes up the set and paint it out. And he's always been very aware of what he has to work with. And with The Mandalorian, I was very upfront with Jon Favreau. This is its pluses, This is its weaknesses. This is how I shot it. And then I'll show you with all the rods, and I'll show you without them. And I'd rather them see what the toolkit is and let them decide how they want to use it than to surprise, you show up on set and it's like, well, what the heck is that? It's like, you didn't tell me it was going to have a cable bundle hanging out of it and rods and whatnot. So I just rather everyone know going in. So there's no surprises. It's like, oh, okay, that's what it looks like. Yeah. All right, great. So we'll shoot it like this. But then there's always somebody wants to push the envelope, which I'm game for that. It's like, can you do this? I don't know. Let's see. Give it a try. And worst thing you can do is fail. So there was no expectation anyway. No. It was that.
It sounds like you like a challenge, but given you've done so much, do you still find much that challenges you in sculpting or modeling now after you've retired?
I think in my sculpting and modeling now, I just want to make it more realistic. More when you see, it's like I'm doing some LRDG guys right now, 1/35th, so they're tiny. But, looking at all the photographs and, I got one guy just holding a cup of tea, just sort of leaning against the vehicle. But if you do it right, that's much more captivating than some guy running with his weapon, screaming and yelling and all of that. Because half the, say 90% of the time, that's what they were doing.
Well, they say war is 90% boredom, 10% terror.
Totally. I believe that. So for the most part, I seem to prefer to show the boredom and the strain of, when's it going to happen? I felt it in one sense in the movie business on set. You'd be tired. You'd be there for hours and just not knowing exactly when you're going to go on and when you've got to perform and do your thing. So there's a lot of sitting around and waiting, and then, all right, hurry up, go, and I can imagine, except for no one's shooting at me, trying to kill me, there's a similarity there. There's the physical exhaustion of going to the location and schlepping all the gear and doing all of that. And there's preparing and getting ready. And then there's hurry up and wait. A lot of that.
And of course, when you are called to do it, you have to give your A game, no matter how tired you are, how long you've been waiting.
Yeah, the adrenaline pumps and you go and you jump into it. Exactly. I remember, I hate it now. I won't do it now, but I remember early in my career being up all night the night before trying to get something done. Sometimes it was because they changed the schedule and you had to accommodate them. Sometimes it was just everyone's lack of not understanding the schedule and how long shit takes to make. But now I don't. I'm not the burning the midnight oil guy. I used to be, in high school, procrastinate with every art project until the night before. But now it's like, no, I don't like that feeling. I'm too old for that.
You can only do that so long. I was always a burn the candle at both ends guy until I hit my mid-40s, and then I just thought, I don't want to do that. I physically couldn't do it anymore, basically.
I agree. Yeah, and probably my mid-40s, I was working for Stan Winston at that point, but he was turning over more and more to me and the other guys to do and run and do. And so I was always in the mindset, let's just get this done early. So we're not up all night night before, trying to, because inevitably, you're not going to, or if you do your best work, you're not going to feel like great afterwards. You're going to be exhausted. I don't like that anymore. There's no fun in that.
Yeah, right.
There's no fun in that.
Well, it just ruins the next day. You think, oh, that's great, we got it done, but it just the next day,
Yeah.
You just can't do anything.
Well, and on set, the next day is just as action packed as the day you just did. So you string those along a few of those days, and you're pretty exhausted.
I imagine the film business is very much one of those jobs where when they want something, they want it yesterday, and long days, full days working. Is it nice to work at your own pace now?
It is nice to work at my own pace, because you're right. The film business was that, and that's all I care about. And whatever your personal life is, or whatever you got going on, your kids, family, always had to seem to take a backseat to what they wanted, when they want it, how fast, how, when, where. Yep. Always front and center. And that does get exhausting. You're always accommodating. And, but now I get up and I work on my own stuff. I figure out what's going to take to a show, and I'm going to get that work done. What's a paying gig? What's not what I'm doing just for me? But yeah, and there's no crushing deadline. Nobody's going to be sitting there, $300,000 a day on set, the whole film crew waiting for you to show up and do your thing. None of that exists anymore. Yeah. So it's nice.
None of that pressure anymore.
No.
I mean, the model business has changed in a similar way, I guess, to the film business, in that computers have changed it with the advent of 3D. And I know you've worked with some 3D stuff, but how do you feel about 3D versus sort of traditional scratch and modeling?
I'm surprised 3D took as long as it did to get going, because I know we started doing 3D stuff 20-something years ago in the film business, and we had switched over a lot of digital 10 years ago, for sure. I mean, with all the hard edge suits and endoskeletons and all these things, it just really lent itself to sculpting it in 3D and rapid prototyping and printing. And I mean, the whole time we were doing this, I figured it just would be a matter of minutes before the model industry would catch on. Now this is 3D printed, that's 3D printed. But it feels like it's late. It took a long time for it to reach. I have no problem with it. There's no easy button to push. It's like, although the best sculptors that I had working for me in 3D came from a traditional background. They did it the hard way first, and now they have symmetry, and you can take symmetry off and do all this and sculpt. No, I think it's opened up more opportunities. I mean, I use a lot of 3D parts when it comes to upgrading kits and whatnot. It's I think it's, although a lot of people seem to get scale wrong. Scale, to me, is a fixed thing. If your model's 1/16 scale, so should your figure. And this measuring from the bottom of the feet to the center of the eyes, it's like, I don't know where that came from. But to me, you would measure a human from the top of his head to the bottom of his heels the same way you would measure a vehicle from the front of the fender to the back of the fender, or however. It's all the same. I learned that lesson years and years ago when I was working for S&T Models for Jim Sullivan, and I was was under the impression, I don't know why, just because that's what it was out there. It was 1/16 is 120 millimeters. And it's not. It is not. 120 millimeters is huge. So I started sculpting figures to go in a Tamiya Tiger 1 in 1/16 scale. And I test fit the figure I was doing, and it's like, this is wrong. This is huge. This is freaking huge. And then you start doing the math, and it's like, well, 1/16 is not 120 millimeters. 120 millimeters has got to be 7 foot tall. And yes, there's some humans that are 7 foot tall, but they didn't exist in Tiger tanks in World War II.
If you look at World War II photos, those guys were really small.
They were.
Because a lot of them grew up in the 30s when there wasn't a great diet.
No.
You know, they weren't particularly tall, and they were certainly not particularly wide either.
No. They were probably 5'6", 5'9", 130 pounds, you know.
Wet.
Wringing wet. And yeah, and you just, anyway, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but
the scale. Yeah, there is an issue. And yeah.
But, you know, you would think in digital, you wouldn't make those problems, the same mistakes. But they do. I see a lot of figure companies that'll do things, you know, they'll be pretty nice looking figures, nicely detailed. I'm not sure they do their research, though. You know, you find things that is just like, that's not what it looks like. That's what the liner looks like. That's not what the helmet looks like. But I think you've got a generation of maybe people that understand how to work the program really well, but maybe they haven't made the mistake of making something too big to fit a kit, or they're told make it 120 millimeters, and that's what they do. You look at lots of 1/35 figures; they're huge. They're actually they're big. They look funny.
I remember the Verlinden figures were always more like 1/32.
Easily 1/32 or 1/30.
Yeah.
They were. Yeah. Anyway, that's something that. And if you do a tall figure, you know, there were people that were 6'1", 6'2" back then. But make sure that they're skinny and lean and they look right next to the vehicle, because, yeah, it's all part of, to me, what it takes to tell that story and make it look real, and make it believable, have it scaled properly.
So realism is something that's really important to you.
It is, and it's probably not to people in the same way it is to me. I mean, there's a young generation that grew up on video games. So, I mean, I noticed, like, going back to my film days, in the first Jurassic Park, they were very concerned about gravity and weight and the dinosaurs and weight transfer and all. And then that seemed to go out the window. Things were just anti-gravity, huge dragons flying through the air and leaping. And to me, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. I mean, I always felt like what we were doing was making the unbelievable believable.
Yeah.
And making the unbelievable even more unbelievable just wasn't my thing. I remember James Cameron saying something. He goes, you can suspend belief with an audience for mere seconds. If you tread beyond that, then your people are going to start to question what you've done. But at the same time, you do want to soup it up a little bit, because that's why people are watching it. They're looking for escape, and they want to see Keanu Reeves jump across a building that, you know, they couldn't do from one to the other.
But there's a limit, isn't there?
There is a
You
limit.
can stretch it,
You
but
can stretch that disbelief a little too far to where
Mm.
people go, all right, this is a bunch of malarkey.
Is history important to you as well with models? Do you think models can tell history?
I do. And for me personally, I have such a book collection, and I collect information, and I collect uniforms and gear and all these things. For me, it's important. That's how you get the realism. And when I sculpt, I'll put that uniform on, or I'll put it on my son and take photos, or I get my wife to take photos of me in the pose, because each type of material and cut folds a different way, and it has its own unique look. Oh, that looks like wool. That looks like leather. Or that looks like cotton. And so that's an aspect that I try. I mean, all we can do is we're doing the best we can, but I try to incorporate that into each piece so that when you look at it, people know if it looks right or not. They're drawn to it because it's like, oh, the drapery on that looks right. Well, there's a reason, because I, put that uniform on, and that's how it really does fold. So it helps inform you as an artist. But back to your question about history, I think, yes, it all goes hand in hand. I spend as much time researching what I'm going to do. Or if I don't know, it's like this LRDG thing. I knew more about the SAS than I did the LRDG. But I bought a bunch of books and I got immersed into it when the idea was brought up to me to sculpt some figures for it. I liked the idea, so I took it on. It's like I always had an interest in it. I always liked the photos, and it's like, well, that looks interesting. But you do have to understand, the battle or whatever it was. I just recently went to Gettysburg, and I live now in Tennessee, and nearby was where the Battle of Franklin was. But it helps to walk the battlefield and to see where this happened. And boy, there's some things in Gettysburg I'm looking, and it's like, well, wow. The Confederates came charging up from there to here, uphill. It's like those guys are different stock than we are today. Those guys were, not only are they in shape, but they were, for you to do that, you had to really either believe in that cause or just feel like you had no choice. I don't know. But I was amazed. It's like, and you're trudging up, you're coming uphill, and people are firing at you, and you're moving forward. It's like, I remember I worked on a movie called The Revenant, and I took my wife to see it, and she looked at me afterwards. She goes, "I'd rather just be dead than to go through that." But yeah, no one's medevacing you off a mountain back then, and if you break your leg, you're probably going to die. And but it's interesting to me. I look at it from the standpoint of, you actually thought you had a chance to go maybe be killed by Indians or animals or disease or hardship. You have a better chance. You think you have a better chance of going and becoming a trapper or a mountain man than you do living in the city. So it kind of would always kind of put a perspective on things to me. It's like, wow, you did this by choice. You went out there. So you must, something in the back of your mind must be telling you this is better than what you've got. As brutal as it looks to us today, trying to judge somebody on their beliefs or what went on 200 years ago. It's sort of impossible.
There's never enough context.
You don't have context. You don't.
You don't live in their world.
No, no. I mean, when I saw the Carnton Plantation, which was turned into a Confederate field hospital during the Battle of Franklin, you can still see the blood stains on the floor up in the children's room, which became the hospital. But you realize they're cutting limbs off of people with the same saw, and there's no cleanliness. They don't know. They just didn't, and this is 1864. They had no idea that how infections would spread or what you had to do. So it's just a different world. Just a totally different world. And the further you go back, they didn't have a clue. They really didn't. They didn't even have a clue 80 years ago. I mean, we're talking, here it is, D-Day. 80 years ago, they didn't know half these things we know now, but they knew some things we don't know now.
Yeah, I was listening to D-Day commemorations this morning, and there's a lot of testimony from people that were there. And also when you're talking about that Confederate charge, the thing that always gets me about that is there's this popular idea in culture that these men were somehow different, that they just didn't feel fear and they went and did it. But the thing that's really impressive about them is they were probably absolutely terrified, but they did it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the courage is overcoming that terror.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when I'm thinking of the Confederates as well, the way they would advance, it wasn't like skirmish like people do
No.
now. Great massed ranks of them into massed fire coming the other way.
Yeah, the Battle of Franklin, they're coming. The battle lasted 5.5 hours, and there was 9,000 casualties. 2,000 of them Confederate dead. And you're going up a slight grade, but you're still moving up a hill. And they're all coming, all 30,000 of them at once. And I can't imagine what it felt like on the other side, the Union side. It's like, oh, they're really doing this. Okay.
Well, it might be them doing it tomorrow, so that's the other thing.
Yeah, it's all pretty stupid. Didn't accomplish anything, did it really? None of these wars seem to. We do them all over again. The First World War is the war to end all wars, and then World War II. Here we are. Yet we still keep doing it.
Bigger and worse, yeah. But how do you put that into a figure? How do you sort of distill all these thoughts and all this sort?
That's why I did that one where the true face of war. I mean, it's a little abstract, but I think that whole idea is a little abstract. It's like on the outside, you're wearing a mask and you're masking all the pain that's really inside. And back, World War II, they didn't call it PTSD, but they had it. They just were told to be quiet and deal with it. I remember there was a guy who lived across from my grandparents when I was growing up. He used to go play with his sons, Barry and Gary, but Dad was a war hero. I think it was Iwo Jima, and he came back with a Japanese sword and flag and all this, but he had a problem with the bottle, and that was the way that he hid, or I don't know, the way he dealt with his situation, of seeing all that horror and whatever. And, he ended up not good. And so it's just a shame, but it uses up people, and some people just can't. I talked to a man the other day who was in Vietnam. He said, yeah, I had an all-expense-paid trip to Vietnam. I was a second lieutenant. And the first day he was at Quai Son or something, rockets came flying over his head. I guess the average life of a lieutenant in Vietnam was like 6 weeks or something. But he said the way he learned to deal with it all was he learned to close doors. He just closed that chapter. and close that door and move on. But, as humans, we all deal with these things differently. One of my good friends growing up, his dad was on Iwo Jima. And he was always pretty calm, nice guy. And then one day, there was some policemen pulled my friend and I over for riding our dirt bikes where we weren't supposed to. And then I remember his dad just getting so pissed off at that cop. Because the policeman was saying, "You haven't seen the death and destruction I have." And then he was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah. Don't talk about death and destruction." They were bulldozing bodies into holes where I was. So these are good boys. Just leave them alone. Just go away. But, he probably learned to shut some doors. But sometimes they pop back open.
Do you think it's possible to communicate that through models, through what we do?
I think that there's a way to do it, and I'm still striving for that. I don't want to. It's very rare that I want to show someone that's dead, or the real horror of it all. I don't want it to be mistaken or glorified in some way. But I guess that's up to me as the sculptor or the painter or whatever to make sure I convey the right idea.
I do worry with military modelling that it presents a particular, almost sanitized image of war that's very much the pipe and drum and not what actually happens sometimes.
Yeah. I had a discussion with somebody at a show I was just at. I had done an Israeli piece from the 6-Day War, and it was like, well, that one's too close. And it's like, well, it's 1967. Is too close? I mean, it was too close for someone in the Crimean War too, when they lived at the turn of the century. I think you're right in that it's like, oh, that happened so long ago. It's Napoleonic, and you're going to show this guy in his fresh blue outfit, and he's freaking horrible. He's getting millions of people died.
Things I've read about Napoleonic Wars as well. So half the time they lived in the uniforms for weeks on end. They didn't fit very well, and the image of the other is a bit dissonant, really.
You have typhus and all these diseases, and when I was at that Gettysburg Museum, there's something I saw is that more men died in the Civil War of disease than they did of being shot or killed. Just because they had no idea. Don't drink that water. It's like, well, why not? Yeah. Napoleon, there's nothing nice about any of these wars.
I mean, I've done a couple of things. I've just finished one today, actually, about the Ukraine war. And I think it is possible to model almost any war as long as you're, for want of a better word, responsible about it. As long as you're aware of what you're doing and you're not just... Because I also worry that it with current wars, it's like a form of consumerism, of entertainment, to make models about them, unless you're really thinking about what you're saying with the model.
Yeah. No, I can see that. You have to be careful. Yeah, and it can turn into a bit rah-rah.
Well, like anything, you can do it badly, or you can put a bit more thought into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also working on 1/16th, the famous couple of guys in those SAS Jeeps. I mean, it's very heroic images, but I like the image of, I think it's Kennedy and McDonald with their shemags on and blowing in the wind, driving the Jeep and all that. And they're cool. And there's that attraction too, that I like to do something because it. Yeah, I remember a famous director saying, "Don't tell me you're doing it because it's cool. Give me a reason." But sometimes it's just cool.
The things that make it cool, though, are interesting. Like, they were very tough, very hardy men who decided to, not think about, or I suppose they thought about it, but decided to know about the dangers, not just of the war they were in, but the desert and being out there without water and potentially running out of fuel and things, and just do it anyway. Quite piratical in a sense.
I think so, and I think some of it's just being young and not realizing the danger.
Yeah, the confidence of
Yeah,
youth. Yeah,
I think of the things I did when I was young. It's just like, I don't know. You just don't have the same respect for things because you haven't lived through it. You haven't done it yet. So I'm sure some of it was blindly going down a path, and then you find yourself in the middle of it. But as humans, we find a way to cope with whatever situation is thrown at us. And those SAS and those LRDG guys in the desert, like you say, no water, and you're conserving fuel. And back when they used to teach dead reckoning, so you knew how to get home, or you could look at the stars in the sky and figure out where you were. You didn't have a GPS to tell you to make a right turn.
maybe a sun compass.
You did have a sun compass, yes.
Yeah, but even so, there's no features to navigate. Well, very few features to navigate by out there, and I guess one looks much like another.
Yeah, well, those guys didn't even
you
have
had to
radios.
know what you were doing.
They couldn't even communicate. And I was, you try to convey that idea of why the flag bearer was such a big deal back in the Civil War, or whatever it may be. It's because people are looking towards that flag to understand if they're moving forward, or what regiment's doing what. Because they couldn't talk. They didn't have a loud hailer. And I imagine once that cannon fire got started and those muskets are going off, and you couldn't hear a darn thing. And your eardrums are probably blown out. And you're looking at a flag to tell you what to do.
The literal fog of war with all that black powder back then as well.
Yeah.
Why do you think we make models? What do you think it is about making little miniature things that?
That's a great question.
Gets to us.
I don't know that I've ever really contemplated it to that level. My wife will ask me that. Why don't you do an angel or a beautiful thing? And it's like, it's a good question. I don't know. I'm just drawn to this. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it's something to do with, I keep hearing the hardship of it, and what these people went through. And I've just, for some reason, seem more drawn to seeing humans against adversity than not. I don't know. It's a really good question. Why do we do this? Yeah, because it's a strange little hobby when you think about it.
Maybe it's a creative way to tell that story. Maybe it's a way you can, from nothing, make something that speaks about that.
Well, for me, I do like that. It's starting out with thin air or a model kit and building around it to tell a story. I do like that, and maybe I'm just meant to tell these men's stories from the past. I don't know. I'm not sure. That is the essence, though, of why do we do this?
I think it's the one question we never ask ourselves.
It's true.
And sometimes I wonder whether it's like the forbidden question, because if you question it too much, you might start wondering why you do it. Maybe it's best not to ask.
Yeah. Why am I obsessed with how many bolts are on the Tiger tank cupola? It's weird. It is. It is strange. Uh, Maybe that's also why at these shows, why there's such a overwhelming look at the fantasy world is exploding. Maybe because people just aren't as interested in that history and how many bolts are on the Tiger tank and where's the seam run on a World War II British greatcoat from 1939. I mean, these are all, it's different, It seems like this younger generation just wants to create something fanciful. For me, I like the military thing because I created fantasy for 40 years. Everything I did was fantasy.
Yeah.
So now I like it being established and you're just trying to recreate something that already happened. It's different than the fantasy thing.
I wonder as well, it's because we grew up around people that fought those wars. Like you were saying, your friend's father was on Hiroshima. My father was in the Falklands War. My grandfather was in World War II. And maybe that's it. It's because we've got that close family connection to the things that happened.
When I was driving,
and the younger generation don't have that.
Yeah, it's true. When I was driving to Gettysburg, I was talking to my dad, who's 93. He goes, you had a great-great-grandfather that fought in Gettysburg. And it's like, really? You never told me this. So this was a new piece of information. But when you think about it, great-great-grand, it's not that far removed. It's really not. I mean, that was my dad's great-grandfather. He actually met him when he was 5 or something, but it's like, it's not that far away. It's only 165 years ago. It's really not that far gone. But, each generation keeps coming along. It does. It gets further and further. And people don't know it the same way as we probably. Well, there's something to what you're saying. I mean, we grew up with people that we really knew fought in World War II that were somebody's dad and somebody's parent and a grandparent, and you knew them. So there was a real connection. But some of this stuff, it's like it's long ago. And what's interesting with the fantasy thing is there's a lot of painters, not so many sculptors. But
yeah, this came up today on. I was listening to the Plastic Posse earlier, and they were talking to Eric Swinton, I think it was, and he was saying that you don't see people converting or sculpting so much in fantasy like you do in. I mean, historical, it's very common to convert or sculpt your own miniatures, but they seem to be more painters than sculptors.
I agree with that. I mean, Eric is a very talented guy and very talented painter and idea man. I think, I'm not sure that if he sculpts, but he partners with guys that do, and they execute together their ideas. But I might have that all wrong. I mean, I don't know. I know Eric from a couple of shows, and he's very talented. But I agree with him. I see a lot more painting in that world than I do sculpting.
In fact, I've heard them call themselves painters rather than modelers. It's more common to call themselves painters.
I think there's a tendency each generation that passes, we had to create things growing up. There was not the market. There wasn't. I mean, now there's 1,000 figures you can go buy.
Even so, I mean, I sculpt because I can never find the ones I want to tell the story I want. If you see what I mean, you can never find the right poses.
Me too. Yeah. So, and I've got that from Schaef. It's like he took those little Tamiya figures and turned them into something great. I mean, at that time, they're spectacular for 1973. I mean, do they hold up today in the same way? No. But he was the innovator, and he was coming up with that stuff when none of us were. So hats off to him. Yeah.
There should be more sculpting. People should do more of it.
They should. I think that when I talk to people about it, they seem intimidated. Maybe it was helpful when I got into it. It wasn't at the same level. Now, if you enter into the sculpting game, you've got you're competing against digital sculptors. You're competing against people that have been doing it for an awfully long time, have a lot of knowledge. I could see how it could be intimidating. But at the same...
But then again,
if you don't do it...
you can make anything you want.
Yeah, you can make anything you want. And if the man who does nothing makes no mistakes, so it's like, just put it out there. Just do it. You will get better. I mean, if you have... I think most of us have artistic talent, but you just have to try to tap into it. It's like musicians will say, you got to go back to the woodshed. You got to go learn those chops. You've got to, if you don't do it, if you have a Zen modeling experience and collect all these things, think about how you would do it. I think it would be the shade of field gray.
In my head, it's perfect.
It's perfect. Yeah, I've embellished it with all of the things on the market, and it was like this Thunder Models kit that I just did, and a mini art kit. They're not fun. I felt for people that were young and just getting into this. It's like you'd leave half the parts off because you'd lost half of them. This little tiny thing, ping, go flying. And I don't know, I had to scratch build, several things out of plastic because the photo etch. It's like, I hate them anyway. But they turn out good, but they, it's like...
there's a lot of work to get there.
Yeah, it's like 20 parts to create one. To me, is the king of engineering. I'll leave it at that.
They've got a really good balance between detail and fun.
Yeah. And you can certainly embellish them. People give those dragon kits a bad name, but I think all of the instructions, trust me, a lot of these instructions aren't that great. I never thought the dragon kits were that horrible.
No,
it's like,
me either.
Okay, yeah. You've never built one of these other ones. They're in your stash. They're in your collection, but go build the thing.
I do think try and build a 1980s Italeri kit, or an Academy kit from their early days. You'll become intimately acquainted with filler and all kinds of other things.
There's that.
Yeah. At least these kits go together, even if they're a bit overcomplicated.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have too.
I have.
I hope listeners have. If you have any feedback or any questions, please do write into info@insidethearmour.com or go to the modelphilosopher.com blog to leave your comments for John. And John, thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoyed this.
I hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did, and I hope to speak to John again soon in the future. I'd like to thank the Model Philosopher patrons Robert, Stephen, Christian, Carlos, Paul, Schaef, Flip and John. I really do appreciate your faith in this show. If you would like to support the show, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com/themodelphilosopher. You can also really help me out by telling your friends about the show and the blog modelphilosopher.com, where you can also find transcripts of all the episodes of the show and extra blogs on the philosophical side of modelling. Coming up in a couple of weeks will be the next episode with a new guest discussing a new topic, and I hope you'll join me for that. But until then, thank you for listening and take care.